Welcome back to another episode of Silent Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing Chasing Amy. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. Holden and Banky are comic book artists. Everything is going good for them until they meet Alyssa, also a comic book artist. Holden falls for her, but his hopes are crushed when he finds out she's a lesbian. Let's begin with my first pro. The cast has been in other Kevin Smith movies, so we are familiar with them, and they are familiar with each other and the directing styles of Kevin Smith. And that shows on screen. For example, the chemistry between Ben Affleck and Jason Lee is between old friends, sort of old cold workers, but in the script they are comic book artists and the play somewhat okay to that style. Also, we have cameos by Matt Damon, Brian O'Halloran, Casey Affleck, Ethan Suplee, Scott Mosier, and interestingly, Jason Lee and Ethan went on to play other characters side by side in the show My Name is Earl. It's a kick to see them in old films together. Next is the way the movie fits in the Skewverse, which is Kevin Smith universe, which is an idea that Kevin came up before the MCU was a thing. So this movie falls after Mallrats and Clerks, but right before Dogma. Thus the ending title card that says Jay and Silent Bob will return in Dogma, which again uses the same cast, Ben playing the fallen angel and Jason Lee playing the devil. So that kind of goes with the idea that Kevin Smith reuses his actors in most of his movies because technically they're friends. Next, I like the story that Silent Bob said about Chasing Amy. That is a real story that, according to Kevin Smith, that he came up after his relationship between him and Joey Lauren Adams, who plays Alyssa Jones in the movie. They were dating and they broke up. So it's a real life lesson that Kevin Smith learned. But other than that, the core element of the story is that new partners should never feel inferior due to the previous relationships of their loved ones, because that is when jealousy pops up and the fighting begins. But some partners can't stop falling for these traps, and thus their relationship is doomed to end and they will forever be chasing Amy. Now for my cons. The story of the friendship between Holden, played by Ben Affleck, and Banky, played by Jason Lee, I feel it should have been a little bit more developed, showing us how they started before they were actually comic book artists, so we can develop a stronger relationship connection with them. And thus when the relationship between Holden and Alyssa pops up, we kind of feel more invested for the friendship between the two and thus align ourselves with Bank. Also, the relationship between Holden and Alyssa never got me really invested. Maybe it was because I saw her as a forbidden fruit since the beginning due to her orientation, and even after she basically fell for Holden, I felt a lack of development in her character. Maybe they should have shown her getting in way deeper, so when the Green Monster jealousy came up, it would have been a bigger impact. Maybe have rumors of her spreading through conventions where Holden attended, hearing people talk about him and Alyssa and laughing and pointing, while Alyssa might have been home and Holden's mind would race with him imagining things that could have been happening while he's away. Then later he confronts her about her past and also show her being a broken mess after they break up and not just being okay with it. I mean, I understand where she was coming from, that she goes through this all the time and has accepted herself for what she has done and what she is now, but show something about the breakup, maybe show her a bit low and depressed because she actually lost the true love of her life. Next point is, why not have Hooper X more involved in the movie, since he is the one that introduced Alyssa to Holden? Maybe he could be the voice of truth between Holden and Alyssa. I'm not saying that for them to end up together, because that is not real life. In real life, you fall and you get up, but you always are left with a scab to remind you of the fall. He should have been sort of like Silent Bob to Holden, but it would have been Hooper X saying something to Alyssa along the lines of, he was the one, but you know you had to let him go, right? And for her to say, yes, but it hurts that I can never have true love. I am always destined to set them free, or something along those lines, but show both sides hurting not to have each other and acknowledge if they were together, it would have been more painful. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly and see how he saw this movie and what grade he gave this movie.
First off, one of the things that I would like to point out that I appreciate about this movie is how it sort of centers around the comic book scene. Just being somebody who grew up collecting some comic book, just from that notion alone, when I saw the opening scene with all the folks going around getting their comic book signed, it really hit home, brought back some memories movies. And so for the movie to sort of cater somewhat to that scene, I can appreciate. But at the same time, I wish they would have come back to it a little bit more. Maybe show a couple more of these conventions, if you want to call them that, throughout the course of the film, as Holden and Alyssa, and even Banky for that matter, because it's sort of this love triangle that's going on, in which Holden is trying to convince Alyssa of his love and for her to reciprocate it. And then also for Banky, who is unwilling to let go of Holden because of the sort of friendship that they've had over many years. So it's a struggle that you can see on screen, although not really played out as deeply as I would have liked it. We did see scenes where Holden gets very frustrated with Banky because Banky is trying to either sabotage the relationship, so to speak, or just get in the way, keeps trying to bring up a bad notion about Alyssa, and that Holden will start to care less about their comic book endeavor. And Holden just wasn't going to have it because for the first time in his life, he felt that he has found the person that he wants to spend his life with. I see all the footprints there. I see these things being set up, but I wish they would have elaborated a little bit more as the story went along. I feel like these arcs that occurred between these three characters never really came to a resolution until the very end of the film, in which it took place after a year since everybody went their separate ways. And to me, I think that's a great way of me to sort of look at this film. It has these parts, and then there was that missing gap in between, like that 1 year. And then we see what happened with each of them, where Banky is now like the sole ownership of what Holden and him were initially involved with as a team. Alyssa now still continue to do her thing, but it's with somebody else. And Holden himself still in the comic book scene, but creating his own comic book, which he gave to Alyssa in memory of what they had. So I wish they would have just shown that in between, where instead of there just being arguments between the three characters, again, Banky not being happy with Holden now being in a relationship with somebody who he thinks is probably too much for him to handle. And to a degree, he was right, not only in revealing Alyssa's past, but how he anticipated Holden to react to that. And to me, of these three characters, I felt that Holden was the least likable because it felt like he was in the wrong on more than one occasion. And I never felt that he came out and apologized for behaving the way he did, either to Alyssa or to Banky. I wanted him to become a better person at the end. And in doing so, he's able to accept those people who are around him, who he is as a person, and being able to live with the sort of mistakes that he has made and apologize for them. And I wanted those intimate moments between him and Alyssa, in addition to him and Banky, because that's pretty much what the entire movie boiled down to, these three individuals. So for them to have just gone their separate ways and then just come back a year later, sort of like on this neutral ground, but you know, they're kind of happy for each other now because they're in a place in their life where they can accept what has happened. You know, that's great, but how it got to the point, I wish they would have elaborated a little bit more. And how they could have tackled this sort of thing, I feel like, as an example, is to have this buildup of Holden after maybe being unable to accept what Alyssa has done in her past, for him to sort of regather himself a bit and let time sort of pass, say a month, and then come to some sort of realization. And I think Silent Bob and his story of chasing Amy did serve that purpose, but I thought that was like the conversation in the movie versus some of the other ones in this movie, in which I felt it dragged on for too long, in which they could have probably divided one of those conversations into like multiple scenes, such as when Holden told Alyssa that he loved her, the scene where they were just in the car. Yeah, sure, this is Holden pretty much pouring his heart out, but I felt like it just went on for too long. I felt that Alyssa's reaction should have been one in which she panicked and she just leaves the car. Maybe Holden's unable to like catch up to her, and then that's where the scene ends. Then we get this anticipation for when they meet up again and how they deal with Holden confessing to her, and then they come to some sort of acceptance of one another, and then they go on with the relationship. You could just continue on with what happened in the movie, in that Holden finds out about Alyssa's past and feels uncomfortable about it, and then what happens at the hockey event happens, but then there's not that long dragged argument that happens outside. Maybe you just see Alyssa walk off very angrily, maybe they have an exchange of words, and that's it. And then you save that conversation that they had outside of the skating rink for another scene, so that you get this build up versus here's a big conversational scene and here's another big conversational scene. Oh, and then here's probably to me the biggest conversational scene, as I mentioned before, between Holden and Silent Bob, where that was Silent Bob's way of telling him, if you want to be with this person, person that you deem to be in love with, then don't make the mistake that I did. That's pretty much what I got out of that conversation. But again, Holden, though, instead of taking Silence Bob's words to heart, he tries to please everybody. And there's the saying, if you try to please everyone, then you end up not pleasing anybody at all. And when he was having that conversation with both Alyssa and Banky, I initially thought, okay, here's Holden coming to a realization. He's gonna apologize. He has grown up as a person, and he's gonna have to choose somebody here, but he's gonna try his best to make the other person understand, and that somebody's gonna end up maybe getting hurt here, but that to me is just life. But instead, he tried to please both of them by saying, oh, let's do this. And although Banky sort of agrees to go along with it, Alyssa didn't, understandably so, given the choice of words that she spoke to Holden. In the end, this is more about a story where you don't get that true happily ever after. It's more about a guy who couldn't accept things for what they are and just be happy that what has happened in a person's past doesn't necessarily dictate who they are in their present. And I thought Alyssa was a great character that exemplifies something like that in the way she was expressing herself to Holden, that she had finally come to meet somebody in Holden that isn't like any other person she has ever been with, and whatever decisions she has made in the past that might have been misguided or just based on her dumb decisions, those are things that she can't go back and correct and necessarily apologize for, but this is who she is now. But Holden is unable to come to that realization and acceptance. So in the end, Holden's character development didn't really reach that sort of pinnacle that I would normally expect in a movie where a character such as himself, where he has so many flaws, they don't get addressed. If this is what the movie is about, then I thought the movie did a good job at relaying that. But just speaking in terms of these characters developing and becoming somebody different from who they were at the beginning of the film, I didn't feel like any of them changed to a degree that made them a better person. It's just like, oh, here was a small bump in the road that I came across and I dealt with it, but I'm going to continue moving on with my life. As Alyssa ends the movie with the line, Holden, he's just some guy in you. So the foundation is there, but it wasn't really built upon as much as I would have liked it. But for a romantic comedy movie, it was alright. So I'm going to give the film a 6 out of 10.
I agree with what Touly said, especially about the ending. It seemed that Holden was the only character that did not have this big realization at the end. Unlike Banky and Alyssa, everybody got separated. Alyssa did her thing and Banky did his thing, but Holden is the one that kind of didn't learn his lesson. That's how I felt. Banky at the beginning, he was one of my favorite characters because he was the best friend who's like, hey, our friendship is going to be forever kind of thing. That's something that a lot of us can relate to. But then all of a sudden Alyssa comes in and he couldn't handle it. I felt that Holden had a lot of character development missing, and to me that kind of bothered me in a sense. He could have used the comic book as a love letter to Alyssa afterwards. Maybe she would have come upon it at a convention here and there and Holden wouldn't be there because his table would be empty, but she reads the comic book and starts realizing that, hey, Holden did grow up in a sense and realized that he made a mistake and what he lost. But at the same time, they don't end up together, but he's just realizing what he did and he came to acknowledge that he effed up. Everything at the end kind of like to me seemed like it was wrapped up too fast in a sense, and like Touly said, for a year to have passed from one second to another, we wanted to see in between there. I never say this, maybe a little wrap up montage of Holden working on this comic book while the other people are doing their own thing. Banky's still doing his issues and Alyssa's doing hers, but Holden's stuck in the basement somewhere just working by himself. And at the end, show the compilation of the comic book coming out and Alyssa reading it. So my grade for this movie is going to be a 6.5 out of 10. Not Kevin Smith's best movie, but a decent one with a small rough story and lacking a bit more of Jay and Silent Bob. I would have liked it to see them a little bit more, especially because Silent Bob was kind of the word of wisdom here, but still worth watching and shows that Kevin Smith isn't afraid of taking on new genres and somewhat tying them together in his universe. So that does it for this review of Chasing Amy. Please join us next time where we're going to review All the President's Men.
Feinstein, why don't you finish one story before trying to get on another?
I finished.
The Virginia legislature story?
I finished it.
All right, give it to me.
I'm just polishing it. I'll work the phone.
Polishing.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.